I've just come from a very different kind of event with 275 military and contractor, congressional staff, journalists, extremely well funded, very confident, not to say cocksure people. They welcome alternative voices there because they're so sure that it won't make any difference. And it's nice to come to this event, which is at a much higher level. Over there, my topic is about the linkages between the predicaments we face. I'm using the word predicament advisedly because there is a tendency in our culture to see things as problems which have solutions. Solutions usually imply solutions within the paradigm that we are used to looking at our world around us. Predicament is something that doesn't have a solution within that paradigm. And that is what we face, and that is the problem in the other meeting too. The Air Force General, I questioned before coming over here, he maintained steadfastly that the Air Force was not on autopilot, as I had suggested, but they were doing a lot of deep thinking, he said, but we don't think so. The linkages, I wanted to start by just talking about a few people, and this may already have happened. Sherman McCorkle has come up. Sherman McCorkle was one of the organizers of the Strategic Deterrent Coalition Symposium. He's a longtime figure here in Albuquerque. He's educated as a banker and has worked to prevent minimum wage increases in Albuquerque in his role as head of the Chamber of Commerce, partnering with P&M in some of this work. We identified Sherman as among the top half dozen people in New Mexico that was blocking social reforms and more progressive economic and social policies. So Sherman was head of the Technology Ventures Corporation, which is in the beginning totally funded by Lockheed Martin. He still is on the TVC board, but he moved on to creating booster organizations for nuclear weapons around the West. So he works with booster groups that he and others have created surrounding Air Force bases. You can see Sherman looking at members of the study group like we were some kind of lower life form. He's very concerned about our presence there, particularly Astrid. Another organizer over there, Peter Wessey, has been working on conservative, he's a prominent nuclear neocon in Washington. And he has a broad spectrum of interests ranging from petroleum resources to nuclear weapons, primarily to space weapons. And Peter and Sherman are probably the two main organizers of that event. And also over there is Tim Morrison and Drew Walter, who are the main congressional staff members in the House of Representatives pushing a nuclear weapons agenda. So the future of New Mexico is substantially affected by Tim Morrison, for example. He functions as the intellectual part of the House Armed Services Committee on these topics, and he is constantly scheming. And so it's not unfair to say that a great deal of the state's future is decided in circles with Tim Morrison, Peter Wessey, Drew Walter, and other people. We have no access to those circles. This confluence of interests between the corporate beneficiaries of the proposed $1 trillion nuclear upgrade with the ideological neoconservatives, with the local revanchist business interests that are looking to implement a kind of southern strategy of economic development via the lowest possible wages. This is a very toxic combination for New Mexico. And this is what we buy into when we buy into things like support the labs, let's support the bases. We're not just getting those federal dollars, we're getting a whole political, social, business, institutional complex that goes with it. For us, it's very upfront and personal. It goes right down to Mayor Berry and the kind of violence that we see on the street. There's a financial element to this. We cannot expect to have domestic programs in the United States which solve the social problems we face, which educate our children, while also spending $1 trillion over 30 years on nuclear weapons and about $1 trillion every year on weapons and homeland defense generally. So there's a financial problem. It's an incompatible financial burden. There is also a problem if there's an incompatible culture and intellectual environment which prevents us, even us, from thinking clearly about the problems that we face, because we are thinking, and the newspapers are thinking, the opinion leaders are thinking in terms of a paradigm which is constantly dug out deeper by these self-dealing, self-interested, very well-funded institutions. Our politicians, as we know, are substantially dependent on these campaign funds, and more so on the threat of that these institutions and the cabal that I've mentioned getting behind another candidate to compete with them. They could be primary. This complex affects our psychology. We see that in the study group all the time. People are overwhelmed by and they are unable to think like citizens. It's easier to begin thinking like a victim. This affects our churches. There's a lot of, you would think that Christian churches and, it's a nonviolent religion in theory, but it's very difficult for churches to fight against the dominant economic forces in their community, so they don't. The nuclear weapons are a kind of religious phenomenon in our state, where we now see, which we didn't see 20 years ago, the triad, the nuclear triad, is now always capitalized in the written publications that we see. So it's now become somehow holy. There is a kind of a cargo cult involved, and there's the speakers today are trying to disabuse the audience that it's not just about the objects, it's about the people and promoting the people and so forth. So it's the narrow focus on devotion toward the nuclear weapons as objects is even a problem for the Air Force. These priorities will affecting everything in our lives, down to food, nature of agriculture, our water supply. You may know there's a pipeline going to be built from Canadian River, I don't know the status of it, down to Clovis. That's about the Air Force bases, primarily, I would say. Now, what is keeping us from my main points are that we don't despite the fact that we think that we are sophisticated and educated people, our observation is that we are, as a society, we're becoming less sophisticated, less knowledgeable, and that we do not understand what is happening to us. It is, there is an increasing level of opacity that is a basic characteristic of the world transition that we are in. Some of you may have seen President Carter yesterday said that the world is at a critical transition point between war and peace. And he, for what all his sins, which we all have, of course, but at 91, he's done a lot, been a lot of places, and I think that's a correct judgment. The world is at a very critical transition. We have to choose. Another main point is that business as usual, and this is extremely hard to accept, business as usual in many ways is not any longer going to be possible for us, even if we would like to not be involved with political issues, even if we, no matter what we think. This is not really about us, our thoughts, our choices. I'm going to mention some of the crises that we are facing, which we do not understand. But I think that Peter Huessy does understand them, at least some of them to a greater extent. And this puts us at a disadvantage. I think that Vice President Cheney's Energy Task Force understood some things which you cannot read in the New York Times or in the Albuquerque Journal. We are complacent, and we are supposed to be kept complacent. Finally, I want to reiterate, I come to the point which Dinah made when I walked in, that this is a broken system, that it is not possible to successfully make small incremental reforms in these systems in many critical areas. There's a system transition already underway, and we have to understand that and not be seduced by the notion that A, business as usual can more or less keep going, and B, that our role might result in some small reform. Most small reforms will now fail. That's just, I think, an aspect of the interrelated crisis that we're now in. And there is a tendency of our two-party political system to seek for very modest reforms to the point of paralysis. And that more mature people will be constantly asking us to lower our expectations, but that's not going to work. I just want to, some of you have heard this already, so please forgive me, but some have not. Picking up again where Dinah left off, in 1994, the Air Force commissioned a study of what the future world would look like and what they had to prepare for, technologically speaking. The Scientific Advisory Board chairman of the Air Force was Dr. Gene McCall of Los Alamos National Laboratory. So I'm connecting Los Alamos to these views, even though we don't know the contributor who expressed them. So in 1994, the Air Force conducted a big symposium and saw fit to print the following predictions of the future. Quote, disparities in wealth and prosperity between nations which have access to energy and information and those which do not will increase, creating jealousies that manifest themselves in violence, especially terrorism. National interests in other parts of the world will thus be dominated by assured access to markets and by security concerns based on the potential of less fortunate peoples to steal or disrupt the affluence they envy. The developed world could become a fortress of affluence, holding the less developed world in line through a combination of rationed access to technology and threats of military power. Distinctions between police and military organizations, especially in terms of organization, training, and equipment, will blur and perhaps disappear as the most frequent use of armed organizations becomes pacification, counterterrorism, and the apprehension or elimination of individuals or groups. Means of swift, sure incapacitation of individuals and groups to halt hostile acts and give authorities the opportunity to deal with perpetrators and provocateurs will be essential and frequently used. Means of effective, truly surgical destruction will be similarly routine and essential. This is the violence-based solution to the neoliberal problem, which has only grown since 1994. I guess to conclude, we could tick off the various severe crises we face, which again, we don't understand in any deep emotional, institutional, educational, intellectual manner. We don't understand the depth, severity, and comprehensiveness of these crises, and we are not formulating any solutions to them worth a darn. I mean climate, I mean aggression, I mean the liquid fuels on which our civilization depends, water. They are all basically problems which are only being addressed in the most superficial and ineffective ways. Our government is largely paralyzed. The battle we have to fight, which will unite all life-affirming strands and constituencies, is for human solidarity and the preservation of a living planet. The fight is against militarization and empire and its associated domestic austerity and pervasive violence, and for solidarity and survival. In New Mexico, part of the battle we have to fight is against the nuclear ideology, which is an ideology of mass death. We have very broad inherent commonality between many different organizations and efforts against this ethic of violence. We don't need to agree on every tiny thing. If we just recognize this broad solidarity and place ourselves forward into actual engagement in public and recruit others to join us. It's time, I think, to recognize that people just entering the higher education system have a very good chance of spending too long in it. The crises are coming now. Let's not think about what people are going to do in 10 years from now or 20 years from now. The world will be very different. And let's think about what we're going to do now and make our policies that will make a dramatic difference and set us on a different course sometime in the next few years, because those are the years of decision. Thank you very much.